Check, check, check. Can you hear me? All right, welcome everybody. So let's get started. I'm going to do us a quick review of last week. Again, if you, this is going to be kind of quick, so if you weren't here last week and if you haven't watched it yet, I do encourage you to go back on the Facebook page, go back a few days or posts and find last week and watch it in its entirety and kind of take your time with it. If you've never done this study before, it can be kind of a lot of information and it's coming at you pretty fast. So I'm going to do a quick recap here, and if you haven't seen the full thing, make sure you take some time and go back there. And also, I did make some copies of last week's slides and this week's slides as well. So after class is over, if you want to grab a copy to help you with your memory and learning and all that good stuff, help yourself. I didn't make a whole lot of copies, so if you do like one per household or something, if your spouse takes one, don't you take one as well. Y'all got to share. So last week, and I cut a few of the slides out, so it's not going to be exactly like last week. I kind of truncated it just to kind of hit the main points. So we started last week with this idea of the sons of God. That phrase, B'nai Elohim, in the Hebrew Bible shows up 3 times. Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 through 8, I think is verse 4, where it says the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took to them whatever wives they chose from the daughters of men. And so that also pops up in Deuteronomy 32 and also in Job chapters 1 and chapter 2. So that phrase is important, and these are divine angelic beings created by Yahweh and appointed to serve at his direction. So one of our, as we talked about last week, one of the, I think, false teachings and false conceptions of Genesis 6 and 1 is that those sons of God were just the righteous men. They were the righteous offspring of Seth, all right? And I think that's twisting the word of God to kind of fit the narrative that makes sense, because all this angel stuff and is too much. And so I think when we reject that explanation pretty plain reading of the text, you have to come up with something else that makes sense. And so I think you're bringing it down to make it mean anything other than these divine angelic beings. So we started there, and so in Genesis chapter 6 we see this rebellion of a group of angels, and we call them the Watchers. That's what the book of Enoch calls them, and we're going to look at that, who abandoned their God-given position and task in order to indulge in sexual relations with human women. So we talked about how this was the very same, essentially it's the very same sin or transgression of Eve and Adam in the garden, right? I'm giving you an assignment and a portion and a boundary, all right? I'm giving you everything you need and everything I want you to have, God says to them, but there's something else over there that looks good, and even though that's not in God's will for me, it looks good to me and it's appealing, and I'm thinking it's going to, the tree of knowledge of good and evil will be like God, right? And so it's the same essential sin. I think these angels saw something that human beings were enjoying, right? Relationship, connection, intimacy between man and woman, and the angels became envious or jealous or somehow desirous of that, and so they stepped outside of God's boundary for them, and they started to indulge in these relations with human women. And so the first part that we looked at in terms of the aftermath of this was what happened to these angels. Jude 1:6 the angels who did not keep their position of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling. That's those angels in Genesis chapter 6. These he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. So they were essentially thrown into the abyss, locked up, imprisoned by God. And 2 Peter says the same thing. Chapter 2, verse 4, for if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell or the abyss, again, the Greek word there is Tartarus, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. All right, so both of those New Testament passages are alluding to that sin by those fallen angels and their consequence, their spiritual imprisonment.
Just a quick question. What does it mean putting them in chains of darkness?
It exactly and specifically what it means, I don't know, but I think it's the language is intended to convey the imprisonment and essentially an inescapable imprisonment. They're locked up. They're not getting out. Yeah, they're not getting out until until and unless God lets them out. So they're being bound. Yeah.
This really bothers me because it implies that you can sin in heaven.
Were they in heaven though?
They chose to leave, right?
Yeah. So, and essentially you have to think about their role as well. So when it talks about their what does Jude say? He says their positions of authority, okay, and abandon their proper dwelling. So I think there's a couple things there. The proper dwelling could be referring to heaven. And again, their choice was made to leave that. And also the positions of authority. And when we get to the book of Enoch, I'm going to show you some key selections and passages that kind of really that follow this narrative and explain it more in depth. But it talks about how God actually sent them and put them over the earth. So they had an assignment down here, possibly. And so it's not necessarily they're in heaven when they sin, but they're on assignment and they chose to go against God's will. All right. So then we ask the question, why did God judge these angels so harshly? Number one, they rebelled against his authority and rejected their appointment, right? He appointed them to this task and this position, and they said, no thanks, I want that over there, all right? Number two, they violated a boundary of God's created order, separating kinds, right? Everything God, the Bible says, created after its own kind, and it reproduced after its own kind. And in doing that, they begat something unnatural and unholy. And then the third main reason, which Genesis chapter 6, again, that whole narrative from verses 1 through 8 bears out, they exponentially increase the level of wickedness on the earth. So it's as a part of a result and a consequence of their rebellion and what they started to do amongst humanity and their offspring and their impact on humanity, wickedness increased greatly on the earth. Man was already sinful, man was already wicked, but they helped it along quite a bit, apparently. All right, and so then we dug a little bit more into that second one, right? This idea of them violating a boundary that God's created order established and begetting something unnatural and holy, and that brings us to their offspring. The offspring of these fallen angels and human women were the Nephilim, or giants. So the Hebrew word seems to denote someone like big and bad, a bully, big, overpowering, overwhelming individuals. And we ended last week with this slide. This is a depiction of Gilgamesh from the legend, right, or the Epic of Gilgamesh. And interesting reading, again, if you want to do a little bit more research on him, and also some of the other these famed mighty ones of the ancient world. And I think that's a good translation of Genesis chapter 6 and verse 4, that latter phrase in the verse. What does it say? It calls them the mighty men of old or something like that. The heroes of the ancient world or of old. And so I think that translation is a little bit better for our understanding. Again, we have a very positive connotation for the word heroes. And these Nephilim, they were not heroes, right, in the sense that we think of heroes, good people, defenders of the innocent, standing up for justice and righteousness. That's what we think of when we hear the word hero. And so that's why I think if you have that translation in Genesis 6:4, not the best one. It's famed mighty ones of the ancient world. So they were men of renown. These were the big people that did great deeds. And of course they could, because they had the strength and the size to do them. Hercules, right, and his deeds. You remember, if you know any of the mythology of Hercules and people like Gilgamesh and Nimrod and all these ancient tales all throughout history and all across cultures. That's one of the amazing things about this. As you dig into this study, every culture has, first of all, a flood narrative, right, in their very ancient stories and creation mythologies. Every ancient culture has a flood narrative, right? And so if every nation on the earth, which we believe biblically, came from one man, and that man being, after the flood, that man being Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and they multiplied and started to spread out across the earth, guess what? Their father and grandfather and grandfather and grandfather, they passed down these stories of their ancestors surviving this worldwide flood. So one thing in nearly every ancient culture, there's a flood narrative, and in nearly every ancient culture, there's giant narratives, right? There are tales, and we call them myths now, right? Because we're modern and we're advanced and we don't believe all that stuff anymore, and it's just fairy tales. So modern, in our modern mindset, we label them as myths, all right? But again, why is it that every culture has these stories, and there's so many common threads among them, all right? I believe it's because all of these so-called myths and legends are rooted in truth and reality. It gets distorted and embellished and changed over time, but it essentially comes back to some essential truth, okay? So here's where we're going to pick up tonight. Y'all ready? Oh, okay. So I'm going to give you 4 Hebrew words real quick that are sort of used in the Old Testament to refer to these giants. Okay, the first one is Nephilim. We've seen that already. It means great ones, or large ones, big ones, something like that. All right. It also, some commentators think it also means fellers, like either like falling, like you fall upon your prey, an attacker falls upon their prey, or like felling trees, right? So the implication is they're big and they're bad, and they're strong, big, strong beings. The second one is Amim, all right, or the Emites. And literally the root word there means terrors. So again, it's telling you something about their character, their nature. These giants, or these Nephilim, they were not heroes, they were not good guys, they weren't defenders of peace, justice, and love on the earth. They were bullies, they were attackers, they dominated mankind, they fought with each other, right? They caused a lot of chaos and havoc on the earth. They oppressed humankind. Okay, so Amim is another one. The third one is Anakim, or the Anakites. That one should sound familiar, right? You probably heard of that one. All right. And literally it comes from a root word that means long-necked men or tall men. I might need to use different colors. Is that a little bit, that blue's a little, sorry. Sorry. So it's Anakim. Anakim. And remember I showed you last week that I am on the end of a word just means it's plural. And so the variation, depending on what translation you're reading from, it might have ites on the end, right? Israelites, Moabites, Ammonites. So the Emites and the Anakites. And then the fourth one is Rephaim or Rephaites. Rephaim. The Rephaim. And that literally just means giants. In fact, that's whenever you see the word giant in the Old Testament, it's translated probably 9 times out of 10, probably from that word Rephaim. I know definitely in the King James, I think when you see the word giants, it's going to be translated from that word Rephaim. Okay. Now, with those 4, so I put them all up there. Each one has a different color. So I've color coded them so that I'm going to, as I go through these scriptures, I want you to see those words in the text. Okay? So Genesis 14, we've already saw Genesis 6, right? The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, right? The product of these fallen angels and the daughters of men. Okay? So Genesis 14, remember when Lot had gone out and kind of gotten himself into trouble and with these kings that were going to war, and Lot got all mixed up in that, and Abram had to go rescue him, right? If you remember that story. One of those kings, Chedorlaomer, went out and defeated the Rephaites, or the Rephaim, in Ashtoreth Karnaim, the Zuzites in Ham. And that, incidentally, I didn't color code that one, but that one actually may be a reference to another, or another reference to giants as well. And it's, I think, Zumzamim in another spot. So they think those 2 words might go together and may be referring to also giants again. But the Emites are there as well, or the Emim. All right? So don't get too lost in this. I'm just showing you verses where all these different words and names show up. Yeah.
Because they have different names, is it more like, how you have the Anakites or Amalekites or whatever, is it from a different region, or they're still giants?
It could be. I think that's some of what's going on here. Yeah, the Nephilim are connected to the Anakites directly in right here in Numbers 13, but it looks like in those other passages they're kind of referred to, and I think some of it is different peoples had different names for them as well. So yeah. So Numbers 13, you remember when the spies went out, Moses sent the 12 spies out to go look at the land before the people crossed in. Caleb and Joshua, thank you, were fired up, ready to go. Let's do it. God's blessed us. The land is great. The other 10 were like, nah, we saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak, there's the Anakim. That's who the Anakim descend from. Anak, the descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. All right, we seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them. So there's the Nephilim and the Anakim that they see as they're scouting out Canaan, all right, before they cross over the Jordan River and start to move in and take possession of the land. These were some of the people that were already living there, all right. Deuteronomy 2, 10 and 11. The Emites used to live there, a people strong and numerous, as tall as the Anakites. I think this is just, they're just talking about the different regions that are being allotted to the tribes as they've gone into the land. And he's talking about describing some of the spaces and some of the land. So the Emites, they were as tall as the Anakites, all right? So again, see maybe two different tribes of giants. They too were considered Rephaites, but the Moabites called them Emites, all right? So maybe different tribes, maybe different people using different names to describe them. But there you got three of them in one text. A little bit further down, still in Deuteronomy 2, verse 20 and 21, that too was considered a land of the Rephaites, who used to live there, or the Rephaim, but the Ammonites called them Zamzumites. That's the word I was stumbling over a few minutes ago, which may be the Zuzites of the previous verse, all right? So there's another name for the Rephaites that the Ammonites called them. Zamzumites. That's a cool name. Deuteronomy 3:11. Some of you may remember this guy Og, king of Bashan. He was the last of the Rephaites. All right. So I think a couple things happened. Number one is that this Nephilim or giant bloodline, what happens to bloodlines over time? They weaken, right? They get diluted over time. And so I think just like with anything, that may have happened to these giants. And so maybe they start to get smaller and smaller and smaller over time. All right. But the second thing that happens, in addition to the bloodline weakening, is what? What do we see in those first few books of the Bible? As the Israelites go into the land, what's happening? They're starting to destroy them and fight against these giants and actually wipe them out. All right. So Og was one of these, the last of the Rephaites, it says, the last of the Rephaim. His bed was decorated with iron and was more than 14 feet long and 6 feet wide. So he's, I'm going to show you in a minute, he's not even one of the bigger ones that of some of the things that have been discovered, but that's still pretty big, right? So they estimate he may have been like 12 or 13 feet tall to actually need a bed that's 14 feet long, all right? So Og, the king of Bashan. 2 Samuel 21, couple more. There was another battle. This is sort of when toward the end of 2 Samuel was sort of recapping some of David and his men, their final victories and battles that they fought. There was another battle with the Philistines at Gob. Sibbecai, the Hushathite, killed Saph, one of the descendants of Rapha. And depending on your translation, if it looks like that, it kind of makes it sound like Rapha is a guy, but it's just the word Rephaim in the Hebrew text. All right. So I don't think translating it as Rapha is right. I think Rephaim. He was one of the descendants of the giants or the Rephaim. Okay. And then also a few verses down, verse 20, there was a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot. He was descended from the Rephaim. All right, so said the book of Samuel recounts some of these final battles. Goliath wasn't the only one, right? There were multiple giants that David and his men, and even Moses and Joshua before them, were battling and pushing back and wiping out. All right, but they were the main force to be contended with.
Does it tell why he has an extra finger or toe?
Nope. The only thing, it doesn't say specifically, but I think we can probably surmise. She asked why he has the extra finger and toe on each hand and foot. And again, yeah, this mixed gene pool, this abnormal, you know, they're abnormal, and so yeah, that's just one more way of, you know, being this, yeah, and just huge. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this next piece, but I do encourage you to spend some time if you're interested. This stuff fascinates me, so I could nerd out all day on this, but I'm gonna try and keep it tight here. So just for the next few minutes, I want to talk about some credible archaeological evidence of the existence of giants. Because again, the world and our modern world, all that stuff is just myth, fairy tale. No, it's not. And actually, one of the things that you see when you really start to do this research is the amount of suppression that's gone on, the suppression of this evidence. And one of the biggest offenders that I've found in my research is the Smithsonian. They are notorious for only displaying and exhibiting what fits with the accepted historical narrative. And anything that's found and discovered that doesn't fit with that, they have a pretty solid reputation for suppressing that. It's not just them. I think it's a lot of museums and historical societies around the world. But definitely when you really start to dig into this topic, you see in a couple of several different situations, when these discoveries are made and people start to talk about them and they start to get some notoriety, the Smithsonian swoops in and, you know, either, you know, they're going to take it to the museum and we're turning it over to the Smithsonian because we trust them, right? Well, of course they're going to display it, and then the stuff's never seen again. All right, so there's this sort of running thread of suppression of evidence that goes against the accepted narrative. Yeah. I think because
What was the question?
why would they do that? All right. I think for a couple reasons. Number one is if we're dedicated to science, what are we not going to give any credence to? Right. Anything biblical, anything religious, anything that we can't explain, you know, we're just going to kind of suppress that. All right. So I think there's this quote unquote scientific anti-religious and anti-biblical motivation, and also the evolution narrative as well. All right. Most museums and historical societies are not committed to a biblical worldview. They're not approaching things from a biblical worldview. They're approaching it from a secular worldview, which is rooted in the evolutionistic worldview. And so anything that confirms the biblical narrative, anything that doesn't jive with the evolution story is sort of swept under the rug, put in the back rooms, we put it in storage in the warehouse, and never sees the light of day. But we have a lot of credible witness testimony, scientific documentation, newspaper articles. Again, I could spend a couple of classes on just that stuff, of these discoveries being made. And this is just a few up here. I know it's kind of hard to see. You can probably read a little bit better on the page, but you see Goliath there, the 10.6, about 10 feet tall. You see Og, king of Bashan, about 12 feet tall. The little guy on the left, that's us, about 6 feet tall. You got this a skeleton found in Lucerne, 19 feet. France, 23 feet. The big dog here, 36, and there were a couple of those way back in the hundreds of years BC, found by the Carthaginians. There's testimony and writings by Pliny the Elder and Herodotus and Josephus, just to name a few credible historians that we rely on for a lot of our knowledge of history, and we give them respect and credibility in every other area. And they also have spoken of giants and skeletons being found and different artifacts being unearthed. So whole lot of credible evidence. That footprint was found in China. And again, if you go looking and digging, you're going to find a whole lot of hoax stuff. And so you kind of have to do your due diligence and weed out, okay, that's just an AI image, of a giant skeleton, and the people were cropped in next to it. So it's a lot of mess and hoaxy stuff. But as you sort of pair it out and parse it out, there's a lot of credible evidence. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep. Yep. A lot of Darwinism and evolutionistic theory has been demonstrably proven false, and yet it's still taught and propagated. Mm. Yeah, yeah. So I wondered about that myself too. I'm like, that's got to be a big old baby coming out. Yeah, Kay.
Is that written in the paperwork you have over here?
Yeah, yep. All of these slides are in there. Yep. Okay, I want you to watch. I'm gonna probably skip a little bit, but I want you to see this. Sorry, gotta get through the ads, of course. Skip it. I want to skip it. I can't skip it. Oh, wow. It won't let me skip. Okay, Wayfair, y'all. This class sponsored by Wayfair.
Today I want to cover a very interesting subject. The Bible talks about giants and the descendants of giants having lived in the biblical land in ancient times. And so is there anything that's been found in the archaeological record that provides evidence for these historical giants? In this video, we're going to look at a discovery that was made in Israel of a horde of giant metal weapons. This huge spearhead that is 66 centimeters long was found right here where I'm standing.
I didn't do that.
So in this aerial footage, you see in the background the Mediterranean Sea, you see the town of Kfar Monash, and then you see the agricultural field where in 1962, this horde of giant metal weapons was discovered. Okay, I am in the field near the Moshav Kfar Monash, and right here is where the report that came out in 1963 says that the horde of metal objects, including tools and weapons, and including these 4 massive spearheads, according to that report, they give a map there, and this is the exact location of where that horde was found, all the way back in 1962. A local farmer was expanding his field. He was plowing new ground and exposed all these metal objects. Scholars debate about when these 4 spearheads date to. You'll see dates for them anywhere from about 4,300 years ago to 5,000 years ago, or even older. Several of the tools and weapons from this discovery are currently on display in the Israel Museum. So I'm here in the Israel Museum, and just up here is the horde of tools and weapons made of copper that were found at Monash. And here we have the most impressive part of this collection, which are these 4 giant spearheads the largest one there upside down. This is the largest spearhead ever found in the land of the Bible. Of course, it's back behind me in the display, so it doesn't look so impressive. So what I'll do is I'll cut the size of it out of cardboard just to give you an understanding of how huge it actually is. In 1963, after the study of this hoard of weapons that were found in Monash, the official journal article came out describing this. And so in this journal article, they give the drawings of the 4 spearheads that were found, and then they give their dimensions. So what I did is I just took those dimensions and a piece of cardboard and cut out those dimensions, because when they're back in a case and back behind me when I'm talking in the Israel Museum, they look very small. And so this will give you a better perspective of just how big they are. This is the smallest of the 4 spearheads found at Monash. It's 13 inches long, and so it is considered in the journal article as a huge spearhead. And so I went around the Israel Museum comparing the size of the smallest spearhead to the other spearheads that were displayed elsewhere. And many of the other spearheads were about this much smaller than this one, quite a bit smaller. Here is on display. For 13 years, he tortured me.
Wow.
He's gonna pay for what he made me become.
It's warm?
It
All
won't.
that?
I'm sorry. It won't let me skip these.
Your brother? Your holes were the holes?
Yeah, I can't click on it. Yeah, sorry. Well, I'm gonna I'll see if I can get that video better for us to watch a little bit more next week. But that does kind of give you an idea. And he showed you the little one right there, but he also had the really big one cut out, and he estimated that would weigh about 5 or 6 pounds, just the spearhead by itself. So the spear would have to be really, really huge. And then a little bit later in the video, he shows all these, you know how armor is built of like little plates and scales? The plates are like this big around just for one scale, and there's like 800 of them that were found in that same spot with the spears. So they think it was one coat of mail of hundreds of scales this size, and they estimate it had to weigh like a couple 100 pounds. And he goes to the scripture and he shows you some of those dimensions and weights of Goliath's armor that 1 Samuel has. So that I just wanted you to kind of see and get a taste of some of the actual historical archaeological evidence. And there's tons more. There's tools, there's huge hammers that nobody of regular size could wield. There's just so much evidence archaeologically of some huge people.
So all of the scriptures that you gave us were after the flood.
Uh-huh.
So if everybody living was destroyed in the flood, how come the giants?
Good question. I said I was going to answer that last week. Janet asked that last week. So 3 possible theories. Number 1, question was, if the Nephilim were on the earth before the flood, right, and that's what led to this exponential increase in wickedness, and then God sent the flood to wipe everything out, how were there then Nephilim or giants again after the flood that we're reading about in Numbers and these different places when the Israelites are going into the promised land after obviously they've repopulated the earth? So 3 possibilities, and they're not all equally strong. I'll tell you which one I think is the strongest. Number 1 possibility is that the Anakim, this is one theory that you'll hear if you kind of dig this out, the Nephilim, rather, somehow escaped the destruction of the flood, that they found a cave to hide in or went way underground, and some of them somehow survived. I don't think that's it. because that makes the word and God out to be a liar. He said, I'm wiping it all out. And if God said I'm wiping it all out, you better believe it all got wiped out. So I don't think that theory holds any weight. Second theory is a little better, but I still don't know about it. Second theory says that one or more of Shem, Ham, and Japheth's wives had some of that Nephilim bloodline in them. Okay? So that's a possibility. I think that theory is better than the first one. So Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's 3 sons, their bloodline was pure, but and it must have been either Ham's wife or Japheth's wife, because I think Shem's bloodline, at least initially, was pure, because that's who God chose, as his people. So if anybody saw Rise of Skywalker, somehow Palpatine returned. So somehow the Nephilim returned. And that's theory number 2, which I give a little bit of credence. Theory number 3 is that, and look at Genesis chapter 6. Here's a clue why I think theory 3 may be the best theory. Genesis chapter 6. It says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. Okay. 4, sorry. Chapter 6:4, Genesis 6:4, sorry. And then there's this parenthetical phrase, and also afterward. All right, so underline, highlight, circle that phrase, Genesis 6:4, and also afterward. So it definitely implies that after the days of Noah and the flood, the Nephilim were still on the earth or back on the earth. And that's when it tells you how they got there in the first place, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. So theory 3 is that some more angels did the same thing after the flood, right? They repeated that sin and, again, brought back around these Nephilim. Maybe not as extensive as before, but there's a possibility that some more angels rebelled or, repeated this same sin. No, I don't think so. She said, were all the Nephilim male? I think you would definitely have to have some females to keep that going, right? So yeah. So those are the 3 theories that I see and hear as I kind of do that research. And like I said, to me, the second one is pretty good, and the third one is pretty good. But we can't say specifically. We just know that somehow they were back again after the flood.
You would think that God wouldn't allow, if that was why he was wiping them out, he wouldn't allow one of Noah's son's wives to have had that.
Yeah, yep, that's true. So that's why I said theory 2 is a little better, but I'm not totally sold on that one. So I think the easiest possibility and the one that makes the most sense is theory number 3.
They did it again.
Yeah,
they
they did it again. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Genesis, it says that it doesn't say how the giants survived the flood. It just says that they were on the earth before and after the flood.
Mm-hmm.
But in Enoch, it does say that the spirits of the giants turned into demons. Yeah, we're going to get there. And there's a sort of a 4th possibility with an asterisk next to it, which I don't necessarily buy, but I'll touch on it when we get there. Yep.
I didn't hear what he said, so if I could you tell me. Is there a thought that goes in our mind in the Bible to us that God could not be making more ones to be doing the activity and producing more?
That he could not be making more?
Yes, is there anywhere that says that? He
Making more what?
That just added.
Create.
Yes.
What class?
Remember said create.
Mm,
Adding on from different parts of
yeah, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now. There's some theories out there. But yeah, let me let me hold off on that. That's a whole rabbit hole. That's a whole rabbit hole. So let me do this real quick before we run out of time. So back to this second one. This is that slide from last week, right? The 3 reasons why God judged those angels so harshly. And remember that second one was one of our main ones. They violated this boundary, okay? And they created something unnatural and unholy. Okay, so when we come back to these Nephilim, you have to understand how God saw these giants. When we think of giants from fantasy and the stuff that we read, and giants are cool, man. That sounds awesome. We'd love to be a giant, you know, so there's this sort of cool element when we think of giants. But again, going into the biblical narrative and putting yourself into the mind and the heart of God to see how he would see them, all right? So think about this. God saw this race of giants and their entire bloodline as unholy and unclean. All right? They're an abomination to God. They're not cute. They're not cool. They're not, oh, awesome giants. No, abomination. He looks at it with disgust and displeasure because these angels that have transgressed have brought something into the world that he didn't put there and he didn't intend to be there and is not in accordance and alignment with his purposes for the earth and for humanity. All right? So completely the opposite of being cool, totally uncool with God. All right? Unholy, unclean. They were the product of the disobedience of his divine authority and the violation of his created order. Now, when you put yourself in that mindset and you look through that lens, looking through the eyes of God on this situation, it starts to actually give you a little bit of insight into some other things that we see in the Bible, and sometimes we skim over it because it doesn't really make that much sense to us. Did you ever wonder why in the midst of, in Leviticus 19, when God is telling the people, you know, treat your neighbor right, don't bear false witness, you know, make sure you uphold justice and mercy, and don't do this, don't do that, treat your neighbor right. All of a sudden in verse number 19, almost seemingly completely out of the blue, and it doesn't seem like it fits, and it's like, whoa, where'd that come from? What does God say in Leviticus 19:19? Don't mate different kinds of animals. Keep going. Don't plant your field with 2 kinds of seed. And don't wear clothing woven of 2 kinds of material.
Wool and linen, right?
Yeah, don't mix wool and linen. Don't mix this and that, right? And it's like when you read Leviticus 19, all this other stuff, like how you treat people, how you live morally, ethically, and then out of the blue, it's like, where'd that come from in 19, verse 19? It's like, what does that have to do with anything? But when you understand, again, this abominable bloodline that's on the earth, that's the result of what he's talking about in verse 19, mixing and matching and creating something that's unholy. All right? So again, him putting that in the law for his people, his holy people, that he wants to remain sanctified, is a commandment that I think he wants to remind them that, you know, there's certain things that don't honor me. Like when you start to step outside of my will and you create some things that don't jive with what I want for you. Whoa. And so it kind of puts that little subset of commandments in perspective, right? God's reminding his people, don't do these things, because when you don't do them, I want you to be reminded of your separateness, and again, my created order, that things have their place and their kind, and you got to be careful about mixing and matching. All right? So I think that, again, this is just me kind of thinking and looking at that verse in light of, once again, how God would see this unholy mix and match with the sons of God and the daughters of men. Those things don't go together, and when you bring them together, they create something that I don't like. Yeah.
Yeah, this is something that could relate. On Facebook, this guy, he is English, and he would take Monster and some kind of food and mix it in with a blender or a glass, and sometimes good, sometimes not.
Yeah. Mixing and matching and meshing everything together, right? Talk to my wife about mixing foods on her plate. Deuteronomy 7. I'm sorry. Yeah.
If you think about it, with a lot of the genetically modified stuff that they're doing now,
Mm-hmm.
usually down the road you find out
Mm-hmm.
not good for it,
Right.
or that it's something else that's wrong with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. So again, here's another piece that this whole thing with the Nephilim, I think, puts in a different light for us, right? And a lot of people stumble over this one. People who are, not believers or struggling with their faith. This is a big one for atheists. If God is love and if God is so good, why did he condone, why did he tell his people to go in there and wipe out the Canaanites and slaughter all of them? That just seems so cruel and wicked and ungodlike and so unloving, all right? But again, when you understand who and what was living in the land, right, and how God saw these giants and their offspring and the people, in a lot of cases, who were worshiping them, right? We talked about that, right? They were worshiping some of these guys as gods or demigods, and increasing the unrighteousness and wickedness in the land. So when his people come into the promised land, their charge is to move everybody else out. It's a cleansing and sanctification of the land from its defilement by the presence of these unholy, unclean creatures. Okay? So it puts that in a new light. And again, I'm going to just read this real quick. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you're in entering to possess, and drives out before you many nations, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, 7 nations larger and stronger than you. And when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. All right? I don't even want that bloodline to exist anymore. Make no treaty with them and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Right? You ever wonder why God said you can't mix and match? I don't want you intermarrying, right? Not only, of course, we see in the next phrase, do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods. The Lord's anger will burn against you. So there's a spiritual and there's also a physical component, I believe, to that commandment, that prohibition against intermarrying, right? Not only will they lead you down a path of falsehood and wickedness, but you're intermingling and marrying with this bloodline that's already tainted and unclean because of this illicit match that I didn't condone. Make sense? Yeah.
Like, in my footnote takes you back to verse 26. The it says, "Do not bring a detestable thing into your house, or you, like it, will be set apart for destruction, regarded as vile and utterly detestable, and the part of destruction."
Right, right. So very, very serious words that God uses against it. And again, to us, if you don't really get it and you're not understanding some of these things, a lot of it is like, that seems harsh, or that seems, too far, or why would God do that? But it makes more sense when you understand, again, how he saw those bloodlines.
They could lock it up.
I'm not sure. That's a good question. I'll think about that, and I think the book of Enoch might give a little bit more insight into that as well too. But yeah,
When you talk about, we were just talking about not mixing of different, I guess, cultures and so forth. Do you think a lot of that in the Bible states that then it's kind of prevalent now that's played out amongst religions and races? You see that still prevalent where people, maybe ministers or preachers or rabbis will go back to certain scriptures, old scriptures, to bring that prevalent why you shouldn't marry this person or that person?
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some of that stuff is taken out of context when some people do it, because again, the thing you got to remember is those commandments, that was for Israel, right? That was for God's nation, Israel. Those things don't apply directly to us. I think for us, we don't, how do I phrase it? We don't follow the precept, we learn from the principle when it comes to old covenant stuff. And so I think the principle for us is our spiritual separateness, right? Our spiritual separateness from the things that defile and corrupt and are against God. And even when you get to the New Testament, verses like "come out from among them," right? Even reiterating some of those Old Testament passages, but putting them in New Covenant light. Evil communication or companionship corrupts good morals. So there's that running thread of spiritual defilement that you have to guard against by not by keeping separate from the things of the world. So, yeah. Man, I wish we could have gotten a lot more, but that's enough for tonight. So next week we're going to start to look into what the scripture says about what happens to those spirits of the Nephilim, all right, when they died, what happened to their spirits, and connect that to the book of Enoch. So those will be some of your first quotes from the book of Enoch, and I'll actually have some stuff printed out for you as well.
So do you suppose the eyewitness stories that we see and hear on TV and documentaries and the Deadites walking in the woods, the beautiful yards, large, very scary creatures?
Ooh, she just brought in Sasquatch, y'all. You don't know. We about to be here for the next 3 hours now, Sandy. See, okay, see, all right. Any prayer requests? Pray for me, because I... Right. Yeah, any prayer requests before we wrap up?